Hi guys, Chelsea the Reading Outlaw here to do the final update for the Dune in June read along. I did it! I told you guys I would totally finish by the end of June, and even though I had my doubts as to whether or not that would actually be true, I did manage to finish. I powered through it this weekend and I finished everything past book 2. As you can probably tell by the title card, I was not the biggest fan of Dune. It started out really great, and there were definitely parts of it that I thought were interesting, but on the whole, I was not the biggest fan. I ended up only giving it 2 stars. Um, I said in my last video that there were a lot of interesting components to it, and there were a lot of interesting components, but I found that the more I got into the book, the more that the kind of old fashioned style and some of the language choices were starting to bother me more and more, and some of the ideas were starting to get kind of repetitive. I did really appreciate a couple of big aspects of the novel. I really thought that the Bene Gesserit were a very, very interesting religious and kind of power structure throughout the book. I thought that their emphasis on feminine lineage and feminine power and kind of the reversal of expected roles that came with that was really interesting. Because of that, Jessica was one of my favorite characters in the book. I also thought it was really interesting how Frank Herbert kind of chose to cover the passage of time and how much time actually passes. Paul kind of goes from being a young boy and adolescent in the beginning to at the end, having a family and a wife of his own. And it's just interesting to see how that progresses. I also really enjoyed kind of the final, I guess, battle scene when Paul and the Freeman come to take over the city. Within that is kind of the emphasis or the discussion of what role fate plays in the book. Paul kind of sees from the beginning that if he's not careful, this kind of Freeman, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? They use the word jihad in the book. This Freeman jihad to revenge themselves against the Harkonnens and take back Arrakis. In his kind of prescience and his seer powers, Paul sees that there's a good chance that if he's not careful, that's going to continue on to affect the rest of the universe. And, at the end of the book, we come to learn that that is what's going to happen. Paul is inevitably going to not be able to stop the Freeman from kind of starting to lead this jihad, not just on Arrakis, but throughout the rest of the universe. And of course, with that comes death and destruction and all this negativity. I thought that part was interesting because it raises some interesting questions about fate and choice and, if Paul could have done anything differently or if this was just something that was consigned to happen to him regardless. Other than that, like I said, I felt that the book just got really repetitive. What started out as really interesting ideas about like ecology and about, political interactions and all of this just got to be more and more dull. The more and more we got into kind of the metaphysical part with Paul going on his like not spirit quests, but like vision quests and vision journeys and having his epiphanies, the more and more we got into that and the more the style kind of started to go almost stream of consciousness or to not delineate so much between what was Paul's seeings and prophecies and what was actually happening. Like all of those bits I just did not particularly care for. I also thought that the more Paul kind of became a prophet and grew into his role as the Muad'Dib, the less I enjoyed him as a character. I wished that he had kind of retained a little bit more of that practicality and normalcy that we saw in him in the beginning of the book. Yeah, that's about it. As far as the actual whole experience, I really enjoyed reading the book because although I didn't enjoy it and although it only got 2 stars, I did say in my review on Goodreads, and I do stand by the fact that I can see why it's kind of a foundational classic in the genre of science fiction. I think that especially if, we give respect to the time at which it came out, I think that there were a lot of really kind of interesting ideas and events that happen. I just think for me it's more of the style that it's told in that kept me from it got more and more distracting and kept it from being an enjoyable read. I do think that it's worth reading. I know that there are tons of people who love it, so I'm thinking this is one of those times where it's just me and I just didn't vibe with the book. But I really, really appreciate Paul leading this read along because I've wanted to read this book for a while because it is such a classic, and I'm glad that I did, even though it wasn't necessarily like, the best book that I've read this year or this month. or in the last like couple of days. But I am glad that I finished it. I'm glad I did the read along, and I think that everybody should go ahead and give it a chance because it's definitely a good one to have just kind of general knowledge of. Those are my final thoughts on Dune by Frank Herbert as part of Paul's Dune in June read along. And let me know below what you guys think. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys around the internet. Bye.